children, you know, who move a lot. There's research that shows that boys need more movement. It literally shows that. But when it comes to Black children, they want to pathologize it, and they literally want parents to drug their kids so they can just, that's so inhumane.
Yeah, it is.
And I'm not doing it, and I didn't do it. And I've had to fight. But the problem is, I've lived in states where teachers have very strong unions. And so sometimes parents, you know, are forced. I know so many Black parents who have been forced to homeschool their children, and it's not been an ideal situation. But the schools, sometimes they coerce and manipulate parents to sign on to things that they normally wouldn't sign on to because they have to work and they need the school. They need the child to be in school. You know, it's really harmful.
So let's start this, and then I'll get going. We're gonna push this live on YouTube. So before I start recording and send it live, it's gonna be recorded on live on YouTube, and it's gonna be on my iHeart, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and I'll send you all those links later today so you can have it and so you can use it. Okay?
Okay, great.
So let's go here. These things take a little bit of time to load. So what state do you hail from? Oh, you're in DC, right?
I live in suburban Washington, D.C., out in Silver Spring, Maryland, but I've lived in Ohio and Alabama.
You know, I'm in Burtonsville.
Hilarious. We like neighbors. So I live off of you might have told me that. So yeah, I live off of Good Hope Road, New Hampshire Avenue.
Yeah.
Yeah. You very close. Yeah, Burtonsville.
We're off of 29.
I am too. I mean, you can get to my place off of 29, yeah. Yeah, so you close to Howard County. We are too. I'm 20 minutes from my cousin, so.
Well, I know we got to hook up because I want to help you and my wife, and I know we want to help our Black children and Black boys and girls be better. So if we can help advocate and be part of that, so you know we could be part
Absolutely. Of yeah, we definitely need some help in Montgomery County and MCPS. Your children attend MCPS as well, or did attend?
What is did attend, honey?
No, she said did your kids attend?
Oh no, because our kids are older and they're spread out.
Oh, okay.
You should tell her the history of. I mean, you should tell her your.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't understand.
Well, we'll get there. So we're live here on Bridges Live, and thank everyone for joining Dr. Paul and here in Bridges Live, and we have Miss Sankara. And I know if I'm like Zakiya.
Zakiya Sankara Jabar, yep.
Yeah. and with words and names, I don't pronounce all that right. As much as I love to travel into different countries and the different people and all those stuff, I'm horrible.
It's okay. It's not a big deal.
But, you know, it is your given name. And so please introduce yourself to Bridges Live and to my audience.
Well, hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Zakiya Sankara Jabar. I am the co-founder of Racial Justice Now. I'm a parent. I'm a wife. I'm a global citizen. And I do work for racial and social justice, particularly around education and making sure Black children have equitable access to a quality world-class education.
Wow, it's for so many things is when we talk about world-class education, I know what I mean when I had to go through education and what I had to struggle through to get through to be seen as a person and not just as a student. And that's different for so many people in what you call the mass of education. I'll give you my little viewpoint. Most people have heard me on Talk with Bridges Live and the things I've talked about. I actually feel education was not meant for the masses. The way the system was set up, it was never meant for poor people. Because if you look at the hierarchy of education, anyone who had the aristocracies of children, they were going to bring in the brightest and the smartest people to teach their child. So why was education developed for social systems or society or systems? Was to create a working force. It was never to create a what you call an educated force or a conscious force. Because if you question the master, if you question the leader, well, I don't know if I can have you on my plantation, or I don't know if I can have you working for me in my factory, because then you're second guessing me. So education and its primal force, I don't know if it was set up for Black people in America.
Of course it's not. I mean, you know the history. I mean, I'm sure you know that it was literally illegal for Black people to learn how to read.
Right.
So that's well documented. Clearly, education has never been set up for Black people. I think it's important for the listeners to know that historically, Black people have always wanted to read, have always wanted to learn, have always wanted to be educated in terms of the United States. If we want to go back to classical Africa and Kemet and all of that, right, then we have to read, African American and other African scholars like Cheonk Diop. There is Dr. Ben Johakinen, Dr. John Henry Clark, and all of these scholars who, and now even with Anthony Browder, who has written several books. The Browder File is probably one of his best-selling, and he's right here also in the DC region. So, we have to be committed to studying the curriculum outside of what we get in schools. Right now, education, and really, since we fought and won the fight for education, is really a tool of social control for Black people and other people of color. And so that's why, you have organizations like Racial Justice Now, or organizations, other national organizations and local organizations in other places in like California, New York, everywhere. People are fighting for what's called culturally relevant curriculum and culturally relevant pedagogy. People are fighting for ethnic studies. People are fighting to see themselves in the curriculum and see themselves at the center and not as people of conquest. So, of course, if Europeans or white people or however if they control education, they're going to make themselves be the heroes in the curriculum and education, and everybody else are the savages. I can tell you, even back in the 80s, we were still learning very horrible things about Native Americans.
Right.
So we just have to be very vigilant, very careful. And I think us as parents who have children today, I know for me, we do a lot of supplementing the education that our children get in the schools. We supplement and make sure that they have a good, healthy self-esteem, that they know who they are, that they know that, despite what the societal kind of messages are, that being African-American or being Black is not a bad thing. I have a daughter and a son, so I make sure, for example, for my daughter, that her toys or her dolls, she loves dolls, I make sure that they look like her. There was a time I can remember, even when I was a child in the 80s, you had a hard time finding a Black doll,
Yeah.
And so those kinds of things, it may seem small, but it's very, very important for children, their self-esteem and for their own understanding, to not insulate or, if you will, like for them basically not to allow this idea of inferiority to seep into their psyche, because you have to make sure you're doing things to combat that from the messages that they may get on television, billboards, or whatever in society.
you are riding on the train of the activism of fighting against the narrative that the others has set out for Black people.
Right.
This is nothing. The people. I guess some people have not heard of the championing of the fight that you're on, or other championing of the fight that other people may be on. But specifically, when it comes to educating of the Black children, the pathology has been actually sick and disgusting. What they tried to do to the Black child.
Right.
And there's
it's been canonized. I mean, right. there was a whole movement of race science in the universities in the late 19th, early 20th century. And some of the biggest, Ivy League colleges were involved. Stanford University, all of them were involved in eugenics.
Yes.
Most of us don't have a conversation about this. We don't talk about this. But it was, Black people, of course, other people of color, and even poor whites who were deemed, throwaways to society, people needed to get rid of them, or that they deserved to be second and third place citizens. So unfortunately, we're still living with the remnants of that. And Black people, as you know, with the recent uprisings that we've had because of state violence and police murder, of course, we're still literally fighting for our humanity as African Americans in this world and in this country.
Most people, if people can just get on one thing, and again, this is a tree that has many branches to it, and education is one of it. But if you had to go to just one of the seeded things that we have grown to fight for, we're the only people that had to fight to prove we're human.
Exactly.
I mean, we're not talking about fight to being an American or fight where Chinese people had to fight to being a citizen, or we had to fight to be considered to be a human being.
It was in the founding documents that we were 2/3.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Could you imagine if a dog? There's a movie. It's called Ted, and it's about the bear, and the bear's a talking bear. And because he got hit by lightning, blah, blah, blah. But in the second Ted 2, he goes to court to fight to be considered to be a person, right? And it was and people thought it was comical, but I felt very heartfelt because he was fighting for his life. And we've been doing that for centuries. Now let's talk about the activism on children and how the schools are trying to riddle, no pun intended, but Ritalin and drugs and medication.
Oh, yeah. You and I talked about that before we went live. It's really criminal, if you ask me. It's really criminal the way that Black children, and there are some, scholars who speculate that after the Brown decision that this was one way to continue to segregate the children.
I'm actually part of that group. I agree.
I think there's some validity there. I absolutely think there's some validity, because when you think about all of these different ways to separate children and tracking, all of that started after Brown. Tracking started, the laws for separating children with disabilities, all of that is after Brown.
Yeah.
And gifted programs, all of that's after Brown. So literally you had people who was okay, we lost this fight, but we have to be more creative and strategic. And here's how we're still going to segregate. In Montgomery County schools, we're still very segregated, and the gifted programs are very segregated. The AP programs, for example, my son, thankfully, because of an activist teacher who just saw his humanity, worked with me. She saw that he was brilliant. And unfortunately for Black boys, brilliance is not encouraged.
No.
And so my son actually shied away from it. He felt like he was going to lose his friends because when he got into the AP class, he's the only African-American child. There's other students of color because, Montgomery County is very diverse. So there's other students of color, but he was the only African-American male in an AP class of students of maybe 60 or more. not in one class, but just in like 2 different classes. But I mean, just the fact that my husband and I really had to encourage him and say, no, you need to stick with this. This is going to help you, you know, in terms of as you continue to matriculate through school. But it really does a disservice to the fact that my son did not want to be in an AP class because he literally did not see anybody else in the class that looked like him or another male. They're Black girls.
Yeah, but not another male. And here's the other. Let's go with just your son, and we're not even going to talk about his name because we're going to talk about that Black boy.
That's right.
You take about that Black boy in that class who could excel if he did not have an attentive parent or the parent that was able to be attentive. We're not talking about want to be attentive or would like to be attentive, able to be attentive to the Black boy. How could he have ever found the self to be in the class? We're not even talking about the stuff he's going to have to go through while being in the class and doing the work, because it's not just the work, it's being in the class. It's finding your self-worth in a class that you don't see yourself. So now let's take the single parent or the parent who's got to work 2 jobs,
right,
to afford something, and now they can't see, they're not able to be as attentive as they like. Then you have this social system of systemic saying you're just not a good parent because you can't give the child the attention it deserves. Well, I have to work 2 jobs, or I have to work long hours at a job. So you're telling me I'm not a good parent, but I'm putting the roof over my children's head. I'm making sure that they're going to school and they're doing good in school. But that there's still this little process that says, you know, your child could be a little better if you give them more. I'm unable to give them more. So now there's that issue, right? Now you take your child that you are attentive to. There are an AP classes. And I've been in master classes, PhD classes. I look around the room, it's me, as an adult male, as whatever. So, and no matter how many Black males you talk to, you go through that all the way through school. You figure we're like, and when you talk to outside of the Black race, you're like, that seems kind of impossible. And we're trying to tell you, there's not many. Even though there's a lot of Black scholars, there's a lot of hardworking college Black students out there. There's a lot. And yet, when you get to that classroom, there's still very few, if any, only you.
Yep.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
And so to me, that goes to the systemic kind of like, this is how that was the plan all along. Like, this is the barrier. And then, you know, but it's presented to people as it's neutral on its face, and it's not. I would encourage your listeners to revisit, if they're not familiar with the work of Dr. Asa Hilliard. He was an African-American scholar. He won when he was one of the key witnesses in the California lawsuit that got rid of intelligence tests, or like the tests where, you know, they try to test and say, oh, okay, you have an IQ of this or IQ of that. He was one of the expert witnesses when that was done away with in California in a lawsuit. And he's written extensively about the brilliance of Black children, but also about the state and education, and how systems have colluded to continue to use education as a method of social control and as a method of oppression, quite frankly.
I agree.
It really is. And I know people don't generally think of school that way, but that's the only way you can get the outcomes that you see for Black children currently in this country. People keep using the terminology achievement gap. It is not an achievement gap. No. Because you put it back on the child, like, okay, because to me, it's a sick way to validate the fact that, well, we told y'all they were inferior. We've been trying to tell y'all. That's why the achievement gap has been like this for 40 years. And that's, nothing could be further from the truth. Because then again, how do you explain all of the Black experts prior to Brown? How do you explain all of the Black doctors, all of the Black scientists? How do you explain Booker T. Washington? How do you explain all of these brilliant Black people? How do you explain Tulsa? How do you explain the brilliance that Black people put together post-Reconstruction?
Right.
How do you explain that if we're inferior? How do you explain the fact that after centuries of oppression, we're still here?
You know, I came up with a theory, and this will be the first time I'm actually saying this live. But if you look at it this way, if Black people were removed from this society that had never came, how many things would have been produced? It would be like this whole civilization went back to the Stone Age, because Blacks had a hand in everything that is modern day, even today. We were either part of the science of it, part of the development of it, or part of the physical building of it. Mentally,
that is so true. When you think about up in Baltimore with Henrietta Lacks, they, it was unethical how they took her cells, how they took her biology, right. But they've created so many, like you said, I mean, we could go literally down the list of the contributions. And let's not forget about the things that Europeans actually stole from us and put their name on it.
Right. We can't, even if we let them have that.
Yeah.
It still wouldn't be enough.
Still. Yeah. So the inferiority piece is a lie.
Yeah.
And, I know her work is controversial, but I think, in my opinion, as an activist, I believe Dr. Frances Cress Welsing has to me, the best logical definition of what racism is and what white supremacy actually is about. And if folks are not familiar with her, they can read her book, The Cress Theory, by Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. She lived here in DC for many years. She's from Chicago. She's actually the daughter of doctors in Chicago, but she passed away in 2016. And so she's one of the scholars that I would encourage people to read if they are not familiar with her work.
One of the things I know you probably get a pushback being an activist and going to schools and then fighting for children, your children and children, Black children, that you get teachers who want to put up their hands going, it's not me, it's not me.
Oh, yeah.
So with a parent that's going to hear this in a different state, in all states and around the world, what would be an idea that you helped and say, some of these teachers, and even if we say it's not your fault because of what you didn't learn or what you were not taught or what you didn't think you had to know, why are you so defensive? Stop asking the why and just accept what is being given to you. How would you help that parent that's going to do that?
I would encourage parents to be resolute and be resilient. Your child, you are their best advocate. You are their lawyer. You know your child the best. I get it that it can be stressful because, as you mentioned earlier, many of the parents are working 2 jobs to live in this very expensive economy. Many parents, some of them are single, raising children, and it's very difficult, and you are up against what you think is a mountain. But I think even for me, I had to make a decision where I had to sacrifice other things. I had to sacrifice so it's about sacrificing, and it's about also building your own knowledge and building and becoming a part of a community where you actually have support.
See, I think right there, I'm going to let you continue, but I really think that's a huge piece. And I know with the things that are moving now, how you want to call this movement, revolution, whatever, if we don't understand to establish our community, and I've been doing a lot of panel on mental health, we need to understand that we are mentally broken, emotionally
broken. In a lot of ways,
And if we don't understand that we need the help to be better, I don't understand how we can build a better community so our children can be better, so our futures can be better. So community is key.
Right, that's exactly right. The community is key in the sense of camaraderie in the sense of the fact that you have a support system. That's not foreign to us as Black people. We've had to do that since the plantation, where, as you know, children will be sold off from their parents. Parents will be sold off from their children. Just horrific kind of things would happen. But you had other people, even on the plantation, who would take in a child, and take care of them as their own. Hell, I'm an example of that. As a child of the early 80s, I've started to share this more publicly, but both of my parents were impacted by the so-called war on drugs, which is really a war on Black people, as we look back and see, right? The crack epidemic that infiltrated our communities and just ravaged Black communities in the early 80s. My mother was a victim of that, and my father ended up spending time in and out of prison. And so you're literally talking to someone who was snatched out of, the care of her parents, in and out of state care until I was able to live with family. And that's how I ended up growing up in the rural South with my great grandparents.
Gotcha.
My great grandmother and great aunts and uncles took me in, right? Did not allow me to stay in the custody of the state child services, and did what they had to do, even though my grandmother was in her my great grandmother, she was born in 1913. She took me in because she said no child of hers was going to be in the system.
Right.
And so she raised me until she passed away when I was heading off to 10th grade. And I was, I moved back to Ohio with a great aunt and finished high school and began college, and, the rest is history, as they say. So we have a tradition in the African-American community where we take care of each other. I think that, there have been things that have happened, like the war on drugs, like other kinds of interventions in our communities that have caused disruptions where some of that has broken down. But we still have found a way in pockets of our communities to be very resilient, and to be very resolute in the face of just continued unrelenting oppression. We have a new fight in this country every single decade. Every single decade. I started off, I came out of my mother's womb in a damn fight.
Yeah.
Literally in 1981. I'll be 40 years old next year. And my entire life, I can look back on it and reflect, okay, this was the fight then. It was the whole crack epidemic, and now we have mass incarceration. All of that was starting when I was born, right? With Reagan, and all of those different kinds of things. Now we, all the way up, now we have Trump. It's just, it's amazing, the fact that, we continue to fight a different fight, or the same fight, if you will. A lot of times it's the same damn fight. We're fighting for voting rights, and we thought we had won that battle in the 60s.
And we didn't. And then one of the things that we have to understand, that the Black people, we're a soulful community. And what I mean by soulful is that we connect back and back to a genetic code of development, of historical fire. And it's not, and so if we just understood that about ourselves, right? The melanin code, understanding not just what we are, but who we can be and who we always were, right? So that connection, once you tap into that connection, and the only way, I'm telling you, I could tell, I could see it, the only way you've tapped into that connection is when you understood, I have to heal myself first before I continue this fight. And if we don't heal ourselves individually, how can we do it collectively? And we have to understand that there's a process of—
That's why you see a lot more people, and if you notice, and I've noticed this, and you may have noticed this too recently, Dr. Paul, is that a lot of African Americans are starting to go back to indigenous African spirituality and practices to heal ourselves, to heal ourselves from the oppression. Many people, are starting to go to Baba Laos, Mama Laos, like all of those different kinds of different spiritualities when it comes to orishas and things like that. I have friends. I remember I was a little skeptical at first because, of course, I'm brought up in Western America and I got a lot of undoing to do. Right? I grew up as a Christian. I grew up all of those things, but when I literally saw that, you know, there's people I love, really good friends of mine who have been doing that work really well, I became attracted and very interested in learning more about it. And I'm still I'm not an expert by any imagination, but I've noticed how recently I've been coming into contact with more people. And I think what triggered this thought is that you're talking about healing ourselves. You can't heal outside if you're not working on healing yourself, if you're not working on the inner work. And I think that to me is the true revolution, really. It really is. It's literally about how are you taking the time to, and it's hard because healing yourself while there's still an assault, it's almost like, you know, I have a gunshot wound here, and I'm working on that. Oh, but then I just got another gunshot wound over here. That's like being Black in America. There's constant assault against our humanity. But I think we do have a responsibility, as you mentioned, to continue to do the inner work to make sure that we're not replicating forms of oppression, because unfortunately that happens as well. Right, because we are still post-traumatic slave. You know, we have a slave. You're familiar with Dr. Joy DeGruy's work? Is that what you're referring to? Uh-huh. Absolutely. I mean, I'm actually going to have her. She's actually going to come on my show pretty soon here. Amazing. I know she's been busy. We've been contacting back and forth, but she's been pretty busy, which is great because people need to seek her out, understanding our pathology of who we are, right, and understanding the pathology of what has happened, right? So with that being said, the comedic sciences, what you were talking about, right, with living sciences, I always say I teach the living sciences, and the people say, Dr. Paul, how do you meet? I said, you know, there's matter, there's atoms, there's neutrons, there's electrons, there's a field, there's a genetic code. It all travels through the soulful travel, right? The soul travels. The soul doesn't stay here and then done. It's been traveling around the universe, and it's a balance. And that's why I love the cosmology of it, the astrophysics of it. I love all that and how it plays a part. And all that was taught in the mystical sciences thousands of years ago, in the middle of the beginning, right? The African sciences were all Indians studying the stars and how it affects us. All indigenous people knew that we were part of all of it. It wasn't separated. And it was only until the Western world had really became its dominant figure that they developed a power over system, that they had to realize that what you're not what they were, but what you're not. And if you understood of what you're not, then how can you ever be what you can be? And that's continuous. So how can people help you understand what we need to do throughout the states, throughout Montgomery County, throughout Baltimore, throughout DC, throughout the United States? Because your activism isn't just in a school district, it should be across the globe. It is. And I think one of the biggest things that people can do, and people are activated right now, Dr. Paul, people are activated. Like you see people, you know, who, and it's funny because it's across race. I'll tell you, I've attended several protests because of the uprising, even right here in Montgomery County. Well, all the protests that I've attended have been right here in Montgomery County. And even the protests that I've seen on TV is shockingly multiracial. Yeah. And so I lived in Ohio before I relocated to this area almost 4 years ago now. And so John Crawford was the very first kind of really, it wasn't the first police murder that activated me. The first police murder that activated me when I lived at the time in Dayton, Ohio, was Kylan English. His murder did not make national news, but it activated our local community. John Crawford, however, did make national news. And I can remember in all the protests that I've ever participated in, particularly around state murder and police murder, have been mostly Black people putting their bodies on the line and getting arrested and things like that. This time it has been different. And, I think that it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that, a lot of people are going inward. A lot of people are becoming more conscious of some of the lies of this universe and things like that. And people are activated towards injustice. And so to answer your question, I think for, African Americans who are listening, join an organization. Right here in Montgomery County, Racial Justice Now is a Black-led organization. My partner and my husband works with the organization. We have another Black woman who works with the organization who is a Montgomery County native. And then in Baltimore, I would encourage people to join organizations like Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. If you live in this country, trust me, you have a grassroots organization, a Black-led or other people of color-led organizations in your backyard that you can be joining to help increase their capacity to do this work. All of these organizations need help. If you have skills that you can volunteer, it's not always about actually giving money, because if you don't have money to give, then if you have a particular skill, for example, this is a skill. We're living during a pandemic at this time. You putting together a show like this and using YouTube and Facebook Live, this is a way to get knowledge out to people. This is a way to build consciousness. This is the way to do political education. These are tools that you can be helping build with organizations who may not have the technological savviness, right, to be able to put on something like this. That's something you can volunteer to do for a Black-led organization to help them. For white people or other people who want to give at this time, certainly reparations, right? I think that, wealth inequality.
That's a conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, wealth inequality is something that we have not talked about very much, and we should. It should be a parallel conversation of race and anti-Blackness, and also the wealth that has been acquired off of the bodies of Black people. I believe Henrietta Lack's family, John Hopkins, have never actually compensated her family for all the stuff that they've done. I mean, it's actually ridiculous. So it's not even just about slavery anymore. It's about the continued oppression. It's about being locked out. As you know, soldiers who fought in World War I, and all of the Black people have fought in every war, but many of them never got all of the benefits that the white soldiers never got. No. We literally have that on record.
Yeah, the housing
Black soldiers,
the education.
Yeah. So reparations is not, people think it's just about slavery and like, oh, well, I didn't own any slaves. Yeah, but you benefited from it. So my thing is that there's a number of different things you can do but for Black people and people of color. Look around your neighborhood, get online, Google is your friend, Google Black-led organizations in my community, or social media is another tool you can use. You can Google organizations like Racial Justice Now, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. There's so many organizations. These are just organizations that are in Maryland that are Black-led. Right. And I encourage people, the other thing I'll say is join a local organization. The national organizations do good work, but they can't be everywhere. Right. They can't be everywhere. Neither do they have the resources or capacity to be everywhere. There is a national Black Lives Matter, but they don't have chapters everywhere. For example, there's not a Black Lives Matter chapter in Maryland.
So let me ask you before you go on, and this is where the argument comes from outside of the Black community, or maybe even inside the Black community, like some of the people like the Candace Owens of the world and things like that. Mm-hmm. Certain organizations aren't always good for Black people.
Right. Right.
And you have to understand that just because they are Black in a Black organization, they just not might be a good organization for you. Or for me. I understand there's different organizations I personally belong to who I'm invested in and what I love to do, just like we meeting up and talking and being, there are other, just do your homework and feel your soul. You know where you belong and where you don't belong. It's like, if you try to find a home church, like if you want to talk to Black folk, you go in, you sit in the church, you're like, nope, this ain't for me. and you're like, I won't be here next Sunday. We do that with relationships. I hope we do that with relationships. If the relationship isn't there and good for you, time to move on.
Right.
Organizations are the same thing.
Right. Yep, I agree. I completely agree. And I think that this is a movement, and it's increasing. And again, I just want to encourage people to join local grassroots organizations and help them build their capacity, because a lot of these issues are local. Policing is local, schooling is local, politics is local. We're so focused on like national politics, and we have Trumps in our backyard all over the country in elected office. Seriously.
We have more to talk about, more to do. I do want to say, be informed, understand what your information is. Understand what information is. Not just get information, understand the information. And if we get those two things, then we can always move into an action. Because then when someone asks you, why are you here? You can go, this. This is the understanding. This. And this
Right.
is why I'm here doing this, that. So understand it, get informed, understand your information, and create an action. I'd like to thank you so much. Is any last
Thank
word?
you.
If people want to reach you, help you, understand what you want to do, is there a website that you want to give out? And yes, please.
People can go to www.rjndmv, so Racial Justice Now, DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia, .org. So that's www.rjndmv.org. You can go to that website, and you can see what kind of activities are going on, and you can also contact us if you'd like to get involved and volunteer. You can also make a donation if that's what you feel like you would like to do. So definitely people can reach me there. I'm also on all of the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And it's Zakiya Sankara Jabar on all of those different platforms. So people can also reach me there. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. God bless, girl. And we will talk to everyone later. If you have any questions for me, please always inbox me. If you have any questions for Zakiya, please let me know. I'll make sure to get it to her. You can always contact me on drpaulholisticscience.com. You can always listen more on the Apple Tunes, iHeartTunes, and all those podcast channels. And we'll be talking to you later. Thank you, dear.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye now.